Humanitarna katastrofa u Sudanu dostiže nove razmjere dok civili masovno bježe iz zapadnog grada El-Fašera u Darfuru svjedočeći brutalnosti paramilitarnih snaga za brzu podršku koje finansiraju Ujedinjeni Arapski Emirati. Prema UN-ovim najnovijim izvještajima od nedjelje je ubijeno najmanje 2000 civila, uključujući 460 u masakru u porodilištu. Razgovaram sa specijalnom izvjestiteljicom Ujedinjenih nacija za Sudan, Denise Brown. U Sudanu, dakle, milioni civila ostaju zarobljeni, raseljeni, gladni, često lišeni i najosnovnijih životnih potreba. U ovom haosu lokalne inicijative preuzimaju ulogu tamo gdje međunarodna pomoć ne može doprijeti. Khartoum Aid Kitchen pruža dnevne obroke, pakete hrane i osnovnu medicinsku pomoć u 8 saveznih država. Sa mnom je Mohamed El-Balala, suosnivač upravo Khartoum Aid kuhinje. Kako to raketu razvija Rusija? Nova generacija strateškog oružja koje bi prema ocjenama zapadnih analitičara moglo promijeniti prirodu modernog ratovanja i dodatno uznemiriti NATO saveznike. Najnoviji primjer je testiranje rakete Burevesnik, nuklearno pogonjene krstareće rakete čije mogućnost daleko nadmašuju konvencionalne sisteme dugog dometa. Ove sedmice su održani i izbori u Nizozemskoj. Centristički liberalni lider Rob Jetten proglasio je pobjedu na srijedu održanim tijesnim parlamentarnim izborima, minimalno nadmašivši anti-islamskog populistu Geerta Wildersa. Ove sedmice slavimo i četvrt stoljeća ljudskog života u svemiru. Međunarodna svemirska stanica obilježava 25 godina kontinuiranog ljudskog života u zemljinoj orbiti. Pratite Puls planete, ja sam Ika Ferer-Gotić. Humanitarna katastrofa u Sudanu dostiže nove razmjere dok civili masovno bježe iz zapadnog grada El-Fašera u Darfuru svjedočeći brutalnosti paramilitarnih snaga za brzu podršku koje finansiraju Ujedinjeni Arapski Emirati. Prema UN-ovim najnovim izvještajima od nedjelje je ubijeno najmanje 2000 civila, uključujući 460 u masakru u porodilištu. Svijet u šoku. Tijela po ulicama, ranjeni koji su ostavljeni jer ih porodice nisu mogle nositi. Pljačka i seksualno nasilje protiv žena i djevojčica. Realnost je sudanskih civila već 500 dana. No tek nakon satelitskih snimaka koji pokazuju razmjere ubistava, svijet je počeo obraćati pažnju. Međunarodne humanitarne organizacije upozoravaju da većina stanovnika još uvijek nije uspjela pobjeći. UN je odobrio $20 milijuna iz Centralnog fonda za hitne slučajeve kako bi se povećala pomoć El-Fašeru i drugim dijelovima Darfura, no novac sada ne može učiniti ono što diplomatija je morala – zaustaviti nasilje. Danas smo užasnuti izvještajima o tragičnom ubistvu više od 460 ljudi, uključujući pacijente i njihove pratitelje, u saudijskoj porodilišnoj bolnici u El-Fašeru. Ovo slijedi nakon nedavnih napada i otmice zdravstvenih radnika. Prije ovog posljednjeg napada naše kolege iz Svjetske zdravstvene organizacije potvrdili su 185 napada na zdravstvene ustanove u Sudanu. Civili se suočavaju s kontrolnim punktovima, iznudom i ubistvima na bijegu, dok humanitarci rizikuju živote dostavljajući hranu i lijekove. Brown apelira na hitan siguran prolaz pomoći, zaštitu bolnica i medicinskog osoblja, kao i podršku žrtvama seksualnog nasilja. Preživjeli humanitarci svjedoče užasu koji se događa na svakom koraku, dok svijet zauzet drugim krizama rijetko obraća pažnju na Darfur. Prizori tijela na ulicama i blokirani humanitarni konvoji čine humanitarnu katastrofu u Sudanu jednom od najtežih u modernoj historiji, zahtijevajući hitnu i odlučnu međunarodnu akciju. Do tada svijet svjedoči još jednom barbarskom činu paramilitarnih frakcija nad nemoćnima, ženama, djecom i bolesnima. As the world's attention swings from one crisis to another, Sudan's humanitarian catastrophe deepens in the shadows. After more than a year of brutal conflict, entire communities in Darfur are trapped between armed groups, starvation and the paralysis of international diplomacy. Civilians fleeing the besieged city of El-Fašera are being stopped, extorted, and killed in masses. 8 convoys are blocked and more than 120 humanitarian workers have lost their lives since April 2023. Many while simply trying to deliver food. Standing at the center of the crisis is Denise Brown, the United Nations resident humanitarian coordinator in Sudan. Her work has become both a lifeline and a warning. The blockade of aid is not collateral damage. It risks becoming a weapon of war. As famine edges closer and violence escalates, Brown's voice grows more urgent. Without safe passage, without respect for international humanitarian law, without international attention, Sudan's collapse will not be contained. Ms. Brown is joining me from an undisclosed location. Ms. Brown, thank you very much for joining me, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown, first of all, what is going on? Can you tell us what is going on the ground in Sudan, in Darfur? You've been there, you work there, civilians are trapped and fighting intensifies, facing ransom checkpoints and no safe corridors. What is the really immediate humanitarian reality inside El-Fašera today?
The reality is, with the violence that escalated just a few days ago on Sunday, we have now received credible reports of summary executions of civilians, unarmed civilians, men in the center of the city. We also have credible reports of summary executions of civilians as they try and flee the city. And also, when we thought that the situation couldn't deteriorate further, we have now credible report, as reported by the World Health Organization, of more than 460 innocent people in a hospital and their families being killed by the RSF. These are credible reports. We have also people arriving in Civili, which is where I was up until a couple of weeks ago. As we tried to get into El-Fašera, people are fleeing not just the city, but also the surrounding areas because of the shelling, because of the violence. And they arrive at the humanitarian hub we have there with the local, national, international actors. And we are receiving people who are adults malnourished, babies malnourished, dehydrated, injured, traumatized. So it's a very, very ugly picture. And it's absolutely essential that the world confront what is happening in Darfur, but in other parts of the Sudan.
It took satellite images to show the world to start paying attention what's going on in Sudan. It's been going on for 500 days, and now we're starting to pay attention. How does the UN plan to protect then civilians when you are being banned and extorted from El-Fašera, especially medical staff following reports of massacres at, like you mentioned yourself, Saudi Maternity Hospital, and what concrete measures can be really immediately taken to prevent further killing of patients and aid workers and humanitarian workers and UN staffers?
The UN has been calling attention to this situation for months and months, starting at the very top with the UN Secretary General, who in July demanded a ceasefire so that we could get humanitarian assistance into the city, into El-Fašera. We have repeatedly called out the potential for violence, the potential for targeting of civilians, as we saw in the Zamzam camp in April 2025. We have been negotiating. That is the responsibility of the United Nations, to talk to all actors. There have been ongoing dialogue with RSF at some senior levels within the UN system, reminding them very strongly of international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians that is required under IHL, which they have flagrantly ignored. Not just ignored, but now we have these reports of civilians in hospitals being killed. So we have been ready for months to go in with basic items, food, medical supplies, hygiene kits, really basic everyday things. And that has been denied. And there will need to be justice for all of the killing and all of the violations that the world is witnessing, in El-Fašera.
And it took such a long time for the world to really start paying attention. And your reports are really collection of accounts that are horrifying. Who needs to be listening to you more? Why? People have been asking, public have been asking, what's the purpose of the United Nations if we cannot have basic rights for the civilians, for the children, and protection of basic human rights. What is the purpose of it all? Who needs to be listening to you more of what you have seen in Sudan, especially in Darfur?
So I'm a staff member of the United Nations, but we also have the member states of the United Nations. And myself as a staff member, as head of the UN in Sudan for humanitarian, my job is to speak out about what's been happening. And I have been speaking out. I have to hope that the member states are listening. I have to hope that we all have to hope that what we've witnessed, and we are witnessing widespread videos circulating of civilians being shot down, and the patterns of rape that we had previously established and reported on in public reports, that finally the world will wake up and pay attention and address what is happening. The Secretary General has repeatedly called for peace talks. The humanitarian response is there. We're doing what we can, but we are not a solution to what's happening in the Sudan.
Who is the solution, according to you, then? Who needs to be sitting at a table?
Well, there needs to be peace talks. And the major actors in this, in the Sudan, need to be sitting down for peace talks, but we're not there yet. The world is not there yet. So this is a massive, massive, and very, very unfortunate wake-up call that more needs to be done on the political side, not the humanitarian side.
2,000 civilians executed in one day. You're mentioning as well accounts of rape of women and girls, children. What immediate steps can UN take to prevent or respond to reports of sexual violence against women and girls in El-Fašera? And how is support being provided to survivors in such highly insecure environment?
Yes, but the rapes didn't start this week. We have established a pattern of sexual violence, particularly in Darfur and particularly by the RSF. Again, I'll repeat it because it's so important to hear what I'm saying. Sexual violence, meaning rape, meaning sexual torture, meaning sexual slavery. We have established these patterns for some time now, and this is tantamount to using rape as a weapon of war. Repeatedly in our reports and our public statements, we have called attention. And of course, now with what's happening in El-Fašera, we continue to receive these reports. The humanitarian, one of the biggest humanitarian hubs we have, the NGOs, local national partners, the UN, is in Tawila, which again is only 50 kilometers away. So we have medical centers set up. We have stabilization centers for malnutrition set up. We have sites for the internally displaced because all those who leave need a place to go. We have community kitchens set up. We have cash transfer set up. We're doing what we can, but again, and a lot is being done, we are not the solution. And this is an important point to understand because we're only talking to the humanitarians this week to understand the impact on the people, which is of course incredibly important, but the conversation can't end there.
You have said also that this blockade of aid is tantamount to starvation being used as a weapon of war. How deliberate is this strategy, and who is most at risk right now?
Well, deliberately not allowing our convoys in is a deliberate decision. Therefore, it is an obstruction of humanitarian assistance. And most of the humanitarian assistance, the bulk of it that we want to take in, for which we have been ready for months, is food. Right? There is great difficulties getting food inside El-Fašera, and we know that the prices of what little food there is out of the reach of most people. 1 kilo of rice, the equivalent of $150 US. So again, we've been ready for months to move in humanitarian assistance, life-saving assistance, services to protect and support people. That has been obstructed, very clearly obstructed, by the RSF. Therefore, we know when we are receiving people, whether it's in Tawila or other areas, and they're malnourished, they're dehydrated, they're not doing well physically or mentally at all. This is deliberate. This looks to us deliberate.
And more than 128 workers have been killed since the war began. When those who bring food and medicine are being targeted, what does it signal about level of respect, or of course the lack thereof, for humanitarian law on the ground?
Well, I think it signals a very clear, a very clear signal of total lack of regard, both for the protection of the civilians of Sudan and those who would assist them, whether it's Sudanese or international. So we're in a volatile situation, and we've seen an incredible deterioration very quickly in El-Fašera over the past few days, and we're at great concern, anticipating what more could happen. When we thought it couldn't get any worse, it got much, much worse.
And families, entire communities, Ms. Brown, are collapsing under trauma, displacement, hunger, and beyond obvious physical harm. What have you recorded? What long-term psychological damage is this conflict inflicting on Sudan's civilian population, and now especially children?
You know that more than 90% of children in the Sudan are out of school because of the war. Family members torn apart by the war, people killed by the war, displaced. So you're leaving your home, you're fleeing your home because of the violence. It doesn't take much to understand what that does to the well-being of a child and the breakdown of community. When I drove from Al Janina to Tawila a few weeks ago, there were numerous checkpoints along the road and numerous child soldiers, young boys. In our estimate, some of them were probably around 10 years old, carrying weapons. This is of huge concern to us. It's about disregard for family and community, but also very concerning for what does this mean for the future of those children and for the future of those communities. So while we're struggling to cope with the situation this week, it's not because the violence ends in El-Fašera that the problem is over. We're looking at something very long term.
And maybe this is a personal question to you, Ms. Brown. When you see all this violence, children and civilians being slaughtered like that in broad daylight, when you look at it from this perspective, is there any hope? Is there any hope for Sudanese people, the children, to, in the long term, to get back to even something that's maybe a shadow of a normal life?
You know, the international humanitarian system is in Sudan, but the first responders are usually the Sudanese themselves, as in every other conflict I've ever worked in. This means there's still a great deal of solidarity between people, between communities. Just look at the health workers in El-Fašera who've now been abducted, doctors and nurses. They stayed those 500 days to take care of pregnant women in that hospital. So there is much to admire with regards to the spirit and the determination of the Sudanese people to get through this. But given the gravity of the situation, we are doing our utmost to be there alongside of them, not just to support, but also to document, because there's a question of justice that must eventually be addressed.
And Sudan's crisis is overshadowed by other global conflicts, as we know. What do you think? Why isn't the world paying more attention to Sudan? Why did it take such a long time, 500 days, for example, to really start paying attention? And what would you say to governments and media who have deprioritized this humanitarian emergency?
But we are paying attention. Those of us here on the ground have paid attention. The UN has paid attention. Other institutions have paid attention. So I can't answer on behalf of those who may not have paid attention. But here's the opportunity. Here's the wake-up call to change that.
Do you think that public pressure could change the reality on the ground for the civilians?
Whatever works, whatever it takes, is essential that others engage in. We are a witness to this. We are part of the response. We are speaking out, but we need the rest of the world to stand up and speak out as well.
And aid can save lives, but cannot end wars. You have said that. You've stated that humanitarian response cannot solve this conflict. What concrete political steps are urgently needed to move towards a peaceful solution, and who must take the responsibility at the end of the day?
Yes, absolutely. We have taken ours. And our plea is that more be done, not just in the humanitarian sphere, but much beyond, so that we are just not here to solve that problem. We are not equipped for it. We don't have the capability to do that. And so our plea is for those who can to please facilitate that.
Ms. Brown, thank you very much for being part of this program. Thank you, and of course, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, bye-bye. Bila je ovo specijalna izvjestiteljica Ujedinjenih nacija iz Sudana, Denise Brown. Ostanite uz nas. In Sudan, millions of civilians remain trapped, displaced and starving, often cut off from even the most basic necessities. Amid the chaos, local initiatives have stepped in where international aid struggles to reach. The Khartoum Aid Kitchen has emerged as a lifeline for tens of thousands of people, providing daily meals, food baskets and essential medical support across 8 states. I'm welcoming Mohamed El-Balal, the co-founder of the Khartoum Aid Kitchen and the analyst on Sudan from Manchester, UK. Mohamed, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Mohamed, let's just start with the basic discussion. Many are still very unaware of the reality on the ground in Darfur. In plain language, how would you describe the situation in Sudan civilians are facing right now, and especially in El-Fašera?
Well, it's catastrophic. I mean, it's in El-Fašera, you had a starvation siege that was being perpetrated by the RSF, which meant that no food could get into the city. And there were lots of initiatives trying to get food into the city. And what we were seeing often is that the people who were trying to bring food in were getting executed. I recently watched a clip where somebody was killed. A couple of people were killed, and they asked them, "What are you bringing in?" And they would say, "I'm bringing in pasta," and they would get shot. And then the next person would be asked, "What are you bringing in?" And they would say, "I'm getting rice," and they would also be shot. So Al-Fašera it's not only just the causes of the war. What you have is a situation where there is an active effort to starve people. So this siege on Al-Fašera ran for 18 months. We actually used to have a kitchen in Al-Fašera that ran, and we had to close that down because we were being directly targeted by shelling. So it became too dangerous to operate the kitchen. And we were hoping to restart that kitchen, but then the RSF started with a full besiegement of the city, which meant no food can get in. So before the recent events that happened in Al-Fašera, you had people starving on a daily basis. The most recent figures that I saw from the Sudanese Humanitarian Aid Commission, just before the city fell, you had 171 children die of starvation. In addition to that, you had much larger numbers of children, and not just children, women, men, and so on, dying because of shelling. So in a space of a week, you were talking about 700 to 800 people dying. Now,
Mohamed, before we continue, why do you think the international community has largely overlooked this emergency? And what messages would you send to, for example, media, governments, and people who should know about what's happening in Sudan to maybe urge more urgent action?
Simply, if I'm being honest with you, I just don't think that a lot of countries see it as of strategic importance. So countries, for example, nearer to home in Europe, like Ukraine, there's a lot more strategic importance. And this is why there's a lot more help and assistance and political engagement. And in addition to that, there's an attitude towards Africa, a persistent attitude where children are dying anyway, that famine happens in Africa, it's a normal thing. And this isn't a normal thing. This is a calculated attempt to starve people. So I think there's some attitudes, some prejudices in regards to Africa. That means that people just assume what these atrocities, these man-made atrocities, man-made famines are just normal, and they're not.
And the Khartoum Aid Kitchen, I want to talk about that. Operating in areas with active fighting and restricted access must be incredibly complex. Can you tell us and describe the most difficult logistical security challenges you and your team faces when distributing food, and how do you navigate checkpoints, roadblocks, or threats from the armed groups?
Well, firstly, we've had 2 of our volunteers during the course of this war that have been killed. They were both killed by shelling. One of our volunteers was a kitchen manager, and another volunteer worked in one of our health centers. And we're not the only ones. There's a lot of local Sudanese initiatives. I know of a partner initiative of ours that have seen 12 of their volunteers killed. So it's and a lot of the times, the vast majority of these incidents, we should be clear, are being committed by the RSF. So it's in areas that were controlled by the RSF, it's extremely difficult to operate. It's extremely dangerous, and it's in those areas that you have had a very large number of volunteers die. If I was to, no one has attempted to put an estimate on it. If I was to attempt to put a rough estimate, I would say more than 1,000 volunteers have been killed during the course of this war, simply trying to deliver aid to their communities. Now, we also we face challenges in regards to the government side, but those are risks to life. It's the issues of bureaucracy, delays, roadblocks, and so on. So there's a difference in the approach, and we can navigate. It's much easier to navigate in areas which are government controlled as compared to RSF controlled. So the ways we have got around this in some areas, for example, where we felt it was too dangerous to operate kitchens, we would distribute food to houses in the area if it's too dangerous to operate a kitchen in the open. So we had a lot of, we developed a certain ways to mitigate the threats, but you could never completely make it safe. And that's why we've seen a lot of heroes. They're heroes because, a lot of them have given up their lives in order to get food to their communities.
Mohamed, Kitchen feeds 30,000 people daily, and the needs of displaced civilians are constantly changing. How is Khartoum Aid Kitchen adapted its operations and over time to respond to surges in displacement, food shortages, or other humanitarian crises? And can you tell us more about maybe existing innovations that have emerged from these adaptations?
So we've had to make a lot of adaptations. For example, before the war, there was a factory that produced nutritious meals for SAM and MAM children. So these are severely acutely malnutrition children and mild acute malnutrition. Now that factory was burnt down at the start of the war. So what we did, we found a recipe and we began to make it ourselves. And we would go in one area, for example, it was impossible to get to via road. So we would load a boat with these food supplies, and we'd take it across the river. And we would distribute it in a couple of volunteer health centers we had, and those programs were extremely effective in taking children who were on the verge of death. The starvation was that severe, and to bring them back to an acceptable condition. So we've had to make a lot of adaptations to try and to deliver both in unorthodox ways for example, via boat, and also to find solutions when the products that we needed weren't available.
Mohamed, I want to talk about your projections for the Sudanese civilians, especially children, in the upcoming period. And of course, the work of Khartoum Aid Kitchen. How do you see it continuing? Do you think it's going to be possible to continue with the kitchen, with the work of the kitchen and humanitarian aid? What is the future of these children on the ground, especially in El-Fašera and other towns in Darfur?
So at the moment, the picture in El-Fašera is very bleak. The picture in Darfur in general is very bleak. The Darfur now is dominated by the RSF. There were 5 army-controlled garrisons of the 5 state capitals of Darfur. All of them have fell. Now, we've seen huge massacres that have happened, for example, in El-Geneina, where we saw 15,000 killed in a matter of 2 days. This was even before El-Fašera, and it wasn't reported much, but it was catastrophic. Those people have been displaced to Chad. The vast majority of them have fled to Chad, and now they are in refugee camps in Chad. This is the Masalit ethnic group, which is one of the non-Arab ethnic groups which the RSF targets. It's a bleak picture there. In El-Fašera, you also, in North Darfur, you face another bleak picture, where now we are trying to locate these displaced people, because after the fall of El-Fašera, as you know, there was mass slaughter, and people are trying to get to safety. So there is a town called Tawila, which is RSF free, and these displaced people are trying to get to. In addition to that, we are seeing displaced people trying to make the long journey across the desert to northern state, which is also safe. They're trying to get to a town called Dabba. Where these people, we are preparing a team to go and meet them and provide support. So the picture at the moment in Darfur is bleak. I can't really sugarcoat it. What we're witnessing is ethnic cleansing, genocide, and the like.
And one last question, Mohamed. One last question for you, please. Do you think there's a media bias when it comes to Sudan? Sexual violence against children, women and girls did not start yesterday. Widespread starvation did not start yesterday. RSF executions, as we've seen this week, did not start yesterday. Where is the media? Why is the media bias so high? Why do you think that is happening?
I think there's an effort to report the news on Sudan in a very neutral way, to paint both sides, the army and the RSF, as the same. And if you speak to Sudanese on the ground, they don't believe that's the case. Now, the reason this is happening is because there's a lot of foreign interest parties in the region which support various parties to the war. So, and the approach has been by the international community often to just condemn both sides. And what that has led to is that the RSF not getting the attention for the atrocities it's committing. So there needs to be reporting that actually reflects what's going on the ground. What's going on the ground is that the vast majority of these atrocities are being committed by the RSF, and this isn't being reflected in the media. There's I've speculated as to one of the reasons why that may be, but the bottom line is that this needs to end. There needs to be a clear condemnation of when atrocities happen by whichever side, but we must also acknowledge that the vast majority of these atrocities are being committed by the RSF. Now, I've seen a lot of statements come out that condemn the atrocities, but that do not condemn the party committing the atrocities. So if you are condemning without an address, it doesn't go anywhere. So this is what we need. We need a response that actually isn't about managing international relations. He actually deals in a humane way towards what's happening with Sudanese. If you see something awful, if you see killing, if you see mass displacement, you need to condemn that party and you need to take clear action against them.
And we need a fair reporting when it comes to Sudan. Mohanna, thank you for now. I wish you and of course your teams on the ground in Darfur much luck and safety. Of course, we'll speak to each other soon. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you. This was Mohanna Del Balal, the co-founder of the Khartoum Aid Kitchen and the analyst on Sudan who joined me from Manchester, UK. Stay with us. Izraelske snage ubile su najmanje 104 Palestinca, uključujući 46 djece samo ove sedmice, dok je još 253 ranjeno, objavile su to Ujedinjene nacije. Napadi su ciljali južni Han Yunis, sjever i centar enklave, uključujući šatore s raseljenim osobama u Deir al-Balahu. Predsjednik Sjedinjenih Američkih Država Donald Trump opravdao izraelske udare navodeći da je ubijeni izraelski vojnik i da Izrael ima pravo uzvratiti. Hamas je odbacio odgovornost i ponovio posvećenost primirju. Izvjestiteljica Ujedinjenih nacija Francesca Albanese osudila je međunarodnu podršku Izraelu. U ovom izvještaju tvrdim da je genocid Izraela u Gazi dio međunarodnog sistema saučesništva. Međunarodno pravo je vrlo jasno. Države ne smiju pomagati niti podržavati međunarodno nezakonite radnje drugih. Umjesto toga mogu spriječiti, zaustaviti i kazniti međunarodne zločine. Ove obaveze su pravne i proizilaze iz kršenja imperativnih normi međunarodnog prava. Dakle, nisu djela dobrote, već odmah zahtijevaju prekid vojnih, ekonomskih i diplomatskih veza sa Izraelom dok njegovi zločini ne prestanu, te traženje pravde za preživjele kroz procesuiranje počinilaca i njihovih saučesnika. Koliko razumijem, ubili su jednog izraelskog vojnika. Čuo sam to prije samo pola sata. Ništa neće dovesti primirje u opasnost. Morate razumjeti da je Hamas vrlo mali dio mira na Bliskom istoku i oni se moraju ponašati. Oni su na gruboj strani, ali rekli su da će se ponašati kako treba. Iako se budu ponašali, bit će sretni. Ako se ne budu ponašali, bit će likvidirani. Njihovi životi će biti okončani. I oni to razumiju. I mi imamo mnogo zemalja koji su spremne to učiniti, znate. Imamo ih. Čak je i Japan rekao da bi volio biti uključen na Bliskom istoku i da vam može pomoći slanjem bilo koga, slanjem ljudi, uključujući stručnjake. Rusija ubrzano razvija nove generacije strateškog oružja koje bi prema ocjenama zapadnih analitičara moglo promijeniti prirodu modernog ratovanja i dodatno uznemiriti NATO saveznike. Najnoviji primjer je testiranje rakete Burevestnik, nuklearno pogonjene krstariće rakete, čije mogućnosti daleko nadmašuju konvencionalne sisteme dugog dometa. Načelnik Generalštaba potvrdio je da je test obavljen 21. oktobra, te da je raketa letjela više sati i prešla 14.000 kilometara. Kapacitet leta joj je 48 sati, kažu iz Kremlja. Prema riječima Putina, pokazala je visoku sposobnost izbjegavanja protuzračnih sistema. Još jednom smo potvrdili pouzdanost ruskog nuklearnog štita. Strateške snage su sposobne u potpunosti osigurati nacionalnu sigurnost Ruske federacije i savezne države. Već smo o tome govorili. To je činjenica dobro poznata svim stručnjacima i vojnom osoblju širom svijeta. Modernost naših oružanih snaga i našeg nuklearnog odvraćanja je na najvišem nivou. Vjerovatno nije pretjerano reći da je barem iznad nivoa svih nuklearnih država. Mađarski premijer Viktor Orban najavio je da će tokom posjete Vašingtonu naredne sedmice pokušati osigurati izuzeće Mađarske iz novih američkih sankcija na rusku naftu. Sankcije administracije predsjednika Donalda Trumpa ciljaju ruske naftne kompanije, utiču na kupce poput Mađarske, koja je nastavila uvoz ruske nafte uprkos invaziji na Ukrajinu. Orban, blizak ruskom predsjedniku Vladimiru Putinu, poručio je da svako ko podržava Ukrajinu podržava rat, te najavio ekonomske sporazume i Mađarski dan u Vašingtonu.
Situacija je bila gora prije godinu dana. Tada su čak i Amerikanci podržavali rat. Sada su samo Evropljani i Ukrajinci za rat. Amerikanci su na strani mira, a i Rusi su došli do tačke u kojoj su pod određenim poznatim uslovima spremni prihvatiti mir ili primirje. Ukrajinci i dalje govore o patriotskom ratu. Oni ne žele zaključiti mir, što je razumljivo, ali za nas je to izuzetno nepovoljan razvoj. Oni su izgubili 20 do 22% svoje teritorije i ne žele je se odreći. Po mom mišljenju, prva i najvažnija izjava je da onaj ko podržava Ukrajinu, podržava rat. Dakle, ko danas podržava Ukrajinu? Podržava Ukrajinu koja želi voditi rat i podržava sam rat.
A Tokio i Washingtonu otvaraju novo poglavlje saradnje nakon sastanka američkog predsjednika Donalda Trumpa s prvom japanskom premijerkom Sane Takaichi. Trump je pohvalio nju za obećanje ubrzanja jačanja japanske vojne, ali i trgovinske sporazume u rijetkim sirovinama. Japan će kroz dogovoreni paket od skoro $500 milijardi ulagati u brodogradnju, u kupovinu američke soje, benzina i kamioneta. Takaichi je istakla Trumpove napore u globalnim sukobima, najavila nominaciju za Nobelovu nagradu za mir. Sporazum također olakšava Trumpove zahtjeve da Tokio povećava izdvajanja za odbranu na 2% BDP-a, dok Japan i Sjedinjene države jačaju strateško partnerstvo sa suočavanju s Kinom. Ponosan sam što mogu najaviti da ćemo potpisati investicije u vrijednosti od $490 milijardi. Izvinjavam se što nisam dostigao 500 milijardi, ali sam malo ostao kratak, ali doći ću tamo. One investicije pokreće japanska inicijativa za strateške investicije koja je nastala zahvaljujući upravo vašoj politici carina i historijskom trgovinskom sporazumu s Japanom. To je osnovni razlog zašto smo danas uspjeli realizirati sve ove ugovore. Ove obaveze osiguravaju nacionalnu i ekonomsku sigurnost Amerike. Razvijat ćemo energiju, nuklearnu industriju, poluprovodnike i jačati cijeli domaći lanac opskrbe. Catherine Connolly, nezavisna kandidatkinja, podržana od strane glavnih lijevih stranaka, izabrana je za 10. predsjednicu Irske nakon ubjedljive pobjede nad Heather Humphreys. Connolly je osvojila 63% preferencijalnih glasova, rekord u historiji irskih predsjedničkih izbora. U svom govoru zahvalnosti obećala je biti inkluzivna predsjednica za sve, fokusirajući se na mir, neutralnost, klimatske prijetnje i nacionalni jedinstveni razvoj. Politički analitičari ističu da je njena pobjeda znak jačanja anti-establishment pokreta i novog talasa promjena u irskoj politici. Biću predsjednica koja sluša i razmišlja, koja govori kada je potrebno. Glas za mir, glas koji se oslanja na našu politiku neutralnosti. Glas koji artikuliše egzistencijalnu prijetnju koja nosi i klimatska promjena. I glas koji prepoznaje ogroman trud kada se ulaže širom zemlje. Moramo to prepoznati i osigurati da se adekvatno podrži. Moja poruka je: koristite svoj glas na svaki mogući način, jer javnost i demokratija trebaju konstruktivna pitanja i zajedno ćemo oblikovati novu republiku koja cijeni svakoga, koja podržava raznolikosti i koja gradi samopouzdanje u naš identitet, naš irski jezik, naš engleski jezik i nove ljude koji su došli u našu zemlju. Centristički liberalni lider Rob Jetten proglasio je pobjedu u srijedu na održanim tijesnim parlamentarnim izborima u Nizozemskoj, minimalno nadmašivši anti-islamskog populistu Geerta Wildersa sa oko 99% prebrojanih glasova. Jetova D66 partija vodi sa oko 15.000 glasova prednosti, što joj donosi projekcijski 27. mandat u 150. članom parlamentu. Jetten, star 38 godina, mogao bi postati najmlađi premijer u modernoj historiji Nizozemske. Na X platformi je proslavio pobjedu obećavajući rad za sve građane Nizozemske, dok je Wilders upozorio da su zvanični rezultati još uvijek neizvjesni. Jettenov uspjeh došao je zahvaljujući pobjedama u ključnim urbanim sredinama i pozitivnoj kampanji pod sloganom Da možemo. Njegova stranka sada mora pregovarati u koaliciji sa najmanje 3 druge partije kako bi osigurala 76 mandata potrebnih za formiranje nizozemske vlade, što se očekuje da će trajati mjesecima. Ove sedmice je uragan Melissa prešao preko Kube nakon što je prethodno poharao Jamajku s vjetrovima od 295 km na sat, jedan od najjačih u Atlantskom okeanu. 100.000 ljudi evakuirano je u skloništa dok upozorenja na uragan pokrivaju provincije Granma i Santiago de Cuba i Guantanamo. Na Jamajki je oluja prouzrokovala poplave, oborena stabla, strujne prekide, oštetila 4 bolnice i ubila 3 osobe. Ukupno 7 smrtnih slučajeva zabilježeno je na Karibima, uključujući Haiti i Dominikansku republiku. Kralj Charles III oduzeo je princu Andrewu sve preostale titule i izdao nalog da se iseli iz svog kraljevskog doma nakon višemjesečnih pritisaka zbog njegove veze s osuđenim seksualnim prijestupnikom Jeffreyem Epsteinom. Buckinghamska palata je navela da je kralj pokrenuo formalni postupak uklanjanja stilskih titula i počasnih odlikovanja princa Andrewa. Odluka je gotovo bez presedana. Posljednji put titula britanskog princa oduzeta je 1919. godine. Odluka dolazi nakon novih otkrića od prijateljstvu princa s Epsteinom i optužbi za seksualno zlostavljanje u objavljenoj posthumnoj biografiji jedne od žrtava. Nova studija zasnovana na više od 2 desetljeća satelitskih podataka otkriva da sjeverna hemisfera planete Zemlje postaje tamnija i apsorbira više topline nego južna. Razlog je što Zemlja odbija manje sunčeve svjetlosti natrag u svemir. Jedan od vodećih istraživača Norveškog centra za međunarodna klimatska istraživanja objašnjava da smanjenje aerosola u zraku, otapanje arktičkog leda i promjene u refleksiji površine doprinose upravo ovom efektu. Također, promjene u oblacima i povećana količina vodene pare dodatno pojačavaju ovo tamnjenje. Iako ova neravnoteža možda neće biti trajna, trend signalizira potencijalne promjene u padavinama, okeanima i dugoročnim vremenskim obrascima. Naučnici upozoravaju da će budući emisijski scenarij i reakcija klimatskog sistema odrediti koliko će sjeverna hemisfera ostati tamnija. Međunarodna svemirska stanica obilježava 25 godina kontinuiranog ljudskog života u svemiru od kada su prvi moduli lansirani 1998. godine, a prva posada, Amerikanka i dvojica Rusa, ušla 2000. godine. Tokom četvrt stoljeća ISS je ugostila 290 ljudi iz 26 zemalja svijeta, pružajući gotovo 127 ljudskih godina iskustva u niskoj zemljinoj orbiti. Stanica je postala centar za hiljade naučnih istraživanja od astronomije i fizike do zdravlja astronauta i uzgoja biljaka. Na njoj je rođena i pojava svemirskog turizma. Unatoč tehnološkoj složenosti, unutrašnjost svemirske stanice nije luksuzna. Nema tuševa, kuhinja za pripremu obroka ili prostora za opuštanje. Ipak, upravo te skromne okolnosti omogućile su razvoj jedinstvenog iskustva dugoročnog života u svemiru, pružajući i dragocjene lekcije za buduće misije, uključujući planirane trogodišnje letove na Mars. ISS ostaje simbol međunarodne saradnje i ljudske ambicije da trajno nastani svemir, dok arheološki pristup otkriva svakodnevni život astronauta i način na koji oblikuju i prilagođavaju svoje okruženje kako bi preživjeli i napredovali izvan Zemlje. I toliko u ovoj emisiji Puls Planete. Za ovu sedmicu ove ostale vijesti svijeta možete i dalje potražiti na našem sajtu newsmaxbalkans.com. Mi se vidimo naredne sedmice. Ne mijenjajte kanal.